Welcome back, everyone. Today we're talking about how to build Captain America, the First Avenger. Let's not waste any time, let's jump right in. So Captain America, Jeskai for a 4/4, has the throw ability, pay 3, unattach an equipment from Captain America. He deals damage equal to that equipment's mana value divided among 1, 2, or 3 targets. And then catch, at the beginning of combat on your turn, attach up to 1 target equipment you control to Captain America. Really cool, really flavorful. I really like how they designed this card. The mechanics of the card are both exactly what you expect, but also fun and unique. So mechanically, Cap is really cool. He's going to be a Voltron-style commander, but he's got these control elements built in, and I've tried various versions of Control Voltron over the years. The most recent was my Kellen Sunforger deck, but it's never been quite there, where Cap is going to do it in a really succinct way that I think is going to be fun and awesome to play. Also, funny enough, because Cap is doing direct damage, he actually has a lot in common with Aisling the Pilgrim in terms of card choice, which is a commander that is very near and dear to my heart. So I did have a lot of fun going through looking at the cards. I'm like, oh yeah, the cards that are good in Aisling are also good with Cap, and vice versa. Love that. Based on the fact that I love Aisling, based on the fact that I love Voltron, based on the fact that I've been trying to make Voltron control work for years, Captain America is probably one of the coolest cards I've ever seen. But just before we dive into the cards, I want to point out that the main Avengers set has not been spoiled yet, and there will probably be any number of cards in that set that also want to go in this deck, but I just don't know what they are yet. I assume that Cap's Shield is going to be in there and probably works really well with the commander, so you're probably going to want to put that in, but we haven't seen the spoiler yet. With that, let's get going. So let's start off by talking about the equipment cards. In general, I think you're going to want about 15 to 22 equipment cards for a deck like this. The card that is most mechanically interesting with Cap is Excalibur, because Excalibur has a mana cost of 12, which makes it by far the most expensive equipment, and it has the built-in cost reduction, plus the fact that it makes a creature 10-0 in Vigilance, and Cap will be free equipping this thing. It just looks ridiculous in the deck. So, as far as I can tell, this is an equipment that you are definitely going to be tutoring for, because this just looks insane with the commander. So, if you get this in play on Cap, you pay 3, you throw it, and you get 12 damage to spread amongst 3 targets, which is insane. And then it comes back on your combat, you hit for, what, 14 damage with Vigilance, and things should be going really well for you. Now, with Excalibur, I do think that people are going to try to blow this up because it does look insane with your commander, so we'll talk about protection spells later, but you're going to want to protect this thing because if you keep this thing on Cap and have some open mana, you're probably going to win the game. Moving on, these are some of my other top picks for equipment that, are kind of the must-haves for this deck. If you want expensive equipment to be flinging around, Cauldra, Embercleave, and Argentum Armor all going to be great to fling, and also going to be great to attack with. They just give so many good bonuses. Colossus Hammer isn't going to be great for the throwing necessarily, but the fact that you can free equip it, just that easy 10-10 right there, caps a 14-14 for a card that you can play on turn 1 and cast your commander on turn 3. That is also insane. That gets you out of Blasphemous Act range in very short order on turn 3. The next thing that came up that I found interesting is Sword of Cauldra, because it says, whenever equipped creature deals damage to a creature, remove that creature from the game. Importantly, that is not combat damage. Also importantly, if you kill the creature will be in the graveyard when that ability triggers, which means it won't get exiled. So you actually don't want to kill the creature so that you can exile it. It's a very strange card, and if you look at the new Cauldra, they actually changed the formatting of that ability. It says, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a creature, exile that creature, and I was actually very upset about that change because of the, really interesting things that you can do with Sword of Cauldra. It's always been really good for the direct damage style commanders. And then, of course, the +5/+5 on there, also going to be good, and half the problem with Sword of Cauldra is the equip cost, which you should be cheating pretty freely. Oh, and this does bring me to an important thing that we want to talk about. There are equipment that you want to throw with Cap, and then there are other equipment that you want to keep on Cap while throwing other equipment. As I mentioned, Excalibur is going to be the single best thing to be throwing with Cap, whereas you don't necessarily want to throw Cauldra, you want Cauldra on Cap while throwing literally any other equipment. And we'll see that as well with some of the other equipment choices that I've picked out here. But before we talk about those, if you are running Sword of Caldra, you may choose to run all of Caldra. It just kind of makes sense. If you want to make it a Caldra deck, that'd be cool. Also, Shield of Caldra. There aren't a lot of good shields in the game. I actually looked them all up. Shield of Caldra is actually one of the very few good ones if you want something that's also flavorful and thematic. So, something you can choose to do with the deck, but isn't completely necessary. Next up, here's another one that looks insane, is Scythe of the Wretched, also really good in Ashling. Whenever a creature dealt damage by the equipped creature this turn is put into a graveyard, return that creature to play under your control, attach Scythe of the Wretched to that creature. So, anything you kill with Cap, as long as the Scythe is attached, you get those creatures into play. And I've done this with Ashling a number of times. It's a game-winning play. Later in the game, it's not unreasonable to think that, like, you can have most of the board under your control. So, Scythe of the Wretched, super cool card, doesn't get to go in a lot of decks, but will be really good in this deck. And also, shout out to Kristen for finding this old gem. Sort of the same idea in Aura form. Whenever enchanted creature deals damage to a creature, you control that creature as long as Charisma remains in play. So with this one, you don't want to be killing the creatures, but also looks like a really powerful effect. The triple blue might be a little rough on this. You're going to want a lot of like filter lands and signets if you're trying to play something like this. But it is a cool, interesting card nonetheless. And be sure to check out Kristen's article on Cap. If I remember, I'll link it below. Moving on from that, the next thing that we want with Cap is Lifelink and Death Touch. And there's a bunch of different ways to get those now. And with Lifelink and Death Touch, I did check on this. When you throw the equipment, because it's part of the cost, state-based effects do get checked between throwing the equipment and the resolution of the effect, which very simply means if you throw a Batter Skull, Cap is no longer going to have Lifelink when the damage is actually dealt. So with all of these, you're going to want these on Cap, and you're going to want to be throwing something else. Again, Excalibur is going to be insane, but literally anything beside your Lifelink Death Touch equipment, or your Cauldras, or your Scythe of the Wretched. So with this deck, yeah, there are going to be some equipment that are for throwing, and some equipment that are for wearing. And I think that should actually be a very fun thing to manage when you're in the game. As far as my top picks from this page, I think Dissection Tools looks really interesting. It's got the Lifelink and Death Touch built in there, and you can skip the equip cost, which is sacrificing a creature, and just use Cap's free equip ability. Batter Skull looks really good to me just because it's a really good card all the time. It's got the higher CMC, so if you do need to fling it, it's there for you. Nazgul Battle Mace looks interesting. I don't know if I'm completely sold on it, but I haven't really played it anywhere, and this could be a solid deck for it. And Basilisk Collar, also just easy Lifelink Death Touch. So I'm probably choosing out of those four, and maybe I'm running between 2 and 4 of those. Next up, we got to talk about Sunforger. Sunforger also going to be pretty good with Cap. Now, it is one of the equipments that you do not want to throw with Cap, because if you do that, then you can't use the Sunforger ability, at least until you put it back on with the Catch ability that Cap has. But it's an immensely powerful Magic card that's won me so many games in my Commander career. And the free equip is just going to be heaven. That means that you can cast Cap on 3. You'd probably wait till turn 5 to cast Sunforger, because you could cast it for 3, use the free equip, and then you have the red-white up to activate the ability, and then you have the red-white up to activate the ability. As I've talked about many times over the years, you should not play an unprotected Sunforger. You don't want to just like throw it out there and not have it equipped and ready to go, because it is a powerful card, and most people have probably seen it at least once or twice by now and know enough to shoot it, because once it's equipped, it is a nightmare. I'm not going to go through every single spell that we want in our Sunforger package, but Teferi's Protection and Akroma's Will are just consistently the best two. They just do so much. Teferi's wins you the game by saving all of your stuff and not dying. Akroma's Will has the indestructible, but also has the lifelink, vigilance, double strike, protection from all colors stuff. So when you're trying to get that big alpha strike in, or sometimes you just need to gain a lot of life, or sometimes you just need the indestructible, Akroma's Will kind of does it all. After that, I want to talk about protection spells a little bit. And while we're off on the Sunforger tangent, I do want to talk about protection spells a little bit. As we saw, Teferi's and Akroma's Will can both be protection as needed, but you're definitely going to want probably at least 5 protection spells in this deck, I would say. But also, you could use some number of counter spells to kind of slot in over those protection spots. I definitely wouldn't go below like 3 protection spells for this deck. But just for context, my strong Aurelia deck runs 10 pieces of protection, because it's the type of thing where if my stuff stays in play, I'm probably going to win the game, and I see that being true with Cap as well. While we're talking about Sunforger stuff, when you add blue to the mix, you do get a bunch of really good counter spells that become available with your Sunforger package. I've listed a couple of the better ones here, but there are a bunch more, and I would probably run at least 2 of these. Next, we have some equipment that I'm considering running solely for flavor reasons. Mechanically, they're not the most interesting with our commander, but Pariah Shield is the other cool shield that exists in the game. Literally all of the other shields beside Caldra and Pariah are barely good enough to play in draft. So if you want a cool shield, Pariah Shield. I haven't really seen Mjolnir in action yet, so it's tough to evaluate its abilities, but it is cool, it is interesting. I just don't know that it like fits in a ton with what we're doing, but it removes blockers, and if you're trying to Voltron, it's probably not going to be the worst, right? And also a thing to think about, it's more direct damage, which, you know, if there's a board full of stuff, sometimes that matters. Next up are some equipment that I thought looked interesting, but probably aren't quite good enough to make the cut if you're running like best in slot everything and have unlimited budget. So I'm not necessarily running out of my way to play any of these, but they're things that are there that are decent to throw around, and you can choose to run them if you want to. Next, we're going to talk about free equips and tutors. So far and away, I think the 2 best support cards for this deck are going to be Stoneforge Mystic and Stonehewer Giant, because I've shown you a lot of really expensive equipment up to this point, and if you run all of the cards I've shown you, the CMC in your deck is going to be insane, so cheating those costs anywhere you can is going to be huge. Stoneforge Mystic and Stonehewer Giant both do those things exceptionally well. Not only are they tutors, they also cheat the equipment into play, which is glorious. So if you can afford a Stoneforge Mystic, absolutely put it in. So these are 2 cards you definitely want to be running. Next up, we have more free equips. Hammer of Nazan is nice for the indestructible. Forge Anew is like an insane magic card, and you should just be running it. Nahiri has always just been good. It's just solid. Cheat the equipment in or bring it back from your graveyard. Both modes great. And Sigarda's Aid, also really good, really powerful. There's also a Secret Lair version of Sigarda's Aid that, you know, you'll probably want to run that one instead. Next, we have even more free equips. They're all really good for their own reasons. The one that's a little weird, Halvar is mechanically weird if you're trying to throw the equipment because it does have to be attached to move it, but it can help you if you have other creatures in play that you're trying to protect or get equipment onto them for some reason. But also the fact that it just gives double strike to equipped creatures is really powerful, and if none of that floats your boat, Sword of the Realms on the backside is a nice little protection effect. So while Halvar is a little weird mechanically, it's still just such a powerful card that it's probably worth including, though it may be the first one that I cut from this little package. And then, of course, we have more tutors. Fighter class, just amazing. I was smart enough to buy a ton of these when they came out because they were cheap, and now they're a few bucks. So, go me. Open the Armory is still great. Kellen is a new one that's really, really good, and Steel Shaper's Gift recently got reprinted, so is actually affordable at this moment in time. And with the tutors, I'm thinking about 4 to 6. Typically, for a game, I'm going to want to do 2 things. I'm going to want to find probably Sword of the Animist, or any of my ramp equipment, and then I'm going to want to find Excalibur. And then after that, like, depending on how the card draw is, you know, you may need to find a Mask of Memory, you may need to find something else. So I'm thinking 4 to 6 equipment tutors or so might be the way to go. Next, we're going to talk about some ramp and card draw options. So ramp-wise, in terms of equipment, this is my ramp package that I love to run anywhere that I can afford to run it. Feast and Famine and Bitterthorn, obviously expensive. Sword of Hearth and Home's a little pricey, but I would say is worth its value. Sword of the Animus kind of goes up and down depending on whether it's been reprinted also. So like, yeah, none of these are the cheapest things ever. And if you can only afford one of them, that's okay, because again, we should be running probably 4 to 6 tutors, and most of the tutors are actually pretty cheap. But I will point out that, like Teferi's Protection and Akroma's Will, Sword of Feast and Famine is just one of those cards that changes the game. I know it's expensive, but it is insanely powerful. So if you can afford it, it will make your deck stronger. And here's some interesting card draw options I stumbled upon. So obviously there's any number of just good blue card draw that exist in the format, any of the staples, like Rhystic Study, Mystic Remora, all fine. These are some of the more mechanically unique to this deck kind of things that we might want to run. We'll start with Mask of Memory is just my favorite card draw spell in all of Commander. I run it in every single deck. People ask why? Because I'm miserable when I don't. I run out of cards, and then I don't have a good time, and I just have a better time when I run Mask of Memory. Shram is a card that I've consistently undervalued over the years, and I think we should put it in this deck. Tome of Legends isn't completely necessary for this deck, but it is a nice repeatable draw source, where a lot of these blue spells are one-time shots, and good as they are, sometimes you just need repeatable draw. But let's take a look at those. So Rush of Knowledge, One with the Machine, and Traverse the Eternity all do roughly the same thing in that they care about the highest CMC of either permanent, artifact, or historic permanent that you control. In all cases, that's probably going to be Excalibur, because Excalibur is the card you want to find with this deck. If Excalibur is in play, that is a 4 to 5 mana draw 12. Which means you probably also want like a Reliquary Tower and maybe a Thought Vessel or something like that. Wizard class is also cool. But anyway, yeah, because of the Excalibur plan, I find that these three look really, really interesting. And beyond that, even if you don't have Excalibur in, you know, any of the like 5, 6, 7 mana equipment will still get you a good number of cards into your hand. And obviously supplement with any number of like blue staple card draw that just kind of shows up in every deck. Here's some miscellaneous creatures to talk about. So first up, we've got Padim, which is more card draw and hexproof for your equipment and artifacts. And Leonin Abunis, same idea, but sadly no card draw. The one to mention here is Indomitable Archangel. You probably don't want to run that one because it gives your artifacts Shroud, which is very different than hexproof. And it means that Cap's ability can't target your equipment to put it back on. So I'm a little sad because Indomitable Archangel is a super sweet card and the art is amazing, but sadly these two are going to outperform it mechanically. Next we have some random stuff. The Spear of Leonidas has been insane in every deck that I've played it. Cassandra is going to give you more card draw. That's a really good package to run. Kedis gives you a way to kill multiple players at the same time. I don't run it in all of my Voltron decks, but I should probably run it a little more than I do. Rayav is some really easy double strike, which is nice, and Akiri is more card draw and potentially indestructible if you need it. A lot of utility in there, so probably also worth running. So from there, I wanted to include some ways to disrupt your opponents, particularly if you're at stronger tables where things tend to happen quickly. Hushbringer and Archon of Emeria I do run in a lot of Voltron decks when I'm trying to shut down certain things. And I also like them because they are flying and they can carry equipment decently well if your commander goes down. Blind Obedience is just good. And then finally, if you're worried about interaction or spell-based stuff, having to interact on the stack, having Silence or Calamity's Wake is notably cheaper than Silence, is a really easy way to like either shut down the big turn that someone else is trying to have, or you cast it on the beginning of your turn so people can't mess with your plans as you're trying to go for like a big alpha strike. And because we're probably running Sunforger, having either Silence or Calamity's Wake gonna be a good idea. So with all of these, you don't need to run them, but in more high power situations, some of them can be useful in certain scenarios. So right here, we have the number of cards that I would probably try to run for each slot in the deck. Equipment, probably 15 to 22. There's maybe a reason where if you're running a lot of tutors that maybe you're down around 15, 16 instead. But honestly, I would probably try to be up around 18 or so with this deck. Creatures, 10 to 20. Your plan obviously involves Cap. Some people like a few more backup creatures in play in case he goes down. I personally am probably going to settle in between like 10 to 14 when I actually build the deck. Tutors, like I said, I think 4 to 6 is going to be about right for this deck. Protection, like I said, 5 to 10. You may use some counter spells in some of those slots instead. Kind of depends on how strong of tables you're playing at and if people are running removal or not. If everyone's just playing like mono green drag race, you may not need as many protection effects. Ramp, I'm probably going to want about 15 pieces. There are a lot of expensive cards in this deck. We're trying to cheat them as best that we can, but we do want to have a lot of ways to ramp. I did show you the equipment that I like for ramping. In addition, I'm probably running a ton of the Signets so that I can run some of the colorless card draw lands and still get colorful mana out of them with the Signets. But I'm also thinking about, I think you want a few rituals in the deck. If you can afford Jeska's Will, absolutely. But if not, something like Ironcrag Feed is actually pretty solid for getting a big equipment into play. Seething Song, decent. Mana Geyser, decent. Maybe a little awkward with the 3-color, but still a powerful card. So I'm thinking you want maybe just a couple rituals in the deck to make some of those bigger plays quicker, particularly with the expensive equipment, and so that, like, your entire turn 6 isn't casting Argentum Armor, right? You can have some mana left over to hold something up if you need to. Draw, aim for 10, but with all the other stuff going on in this deck, you may not quite get there. And with the tutors, if you're tutoring Mask of Memory a lot like I do, you can get away with some lower card draw numbers. Removal, generally I like to aim for 10 to 13. Again, this deck's going to get a little weird. Cap does have built-in removal, so you may not need as much creature spot removal. You may want to focus more on things that blow up artifacts and enchantments. I'd still probably have at least 2 board wipes just in case things go wrong. So yeah, with the draw and the removal, aim for about 10, but there might be some give and take there, depending on some other things that are going on within the deck. So yeah, those are some of the cards that look really interesting to me for this deck. Like I said, there's a lot of overlap with Ashling the Pilgrim here, and that just warms my heart, so I think I'm absolutely gonna love playing Cap. And I'm also excited to have the Voltron Control Commander, because like I said, it's a thing that I've tried a few times in the past, but never quite got it to where I want it to be. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, feel free to comment, like, or subscribe. Thank you for watching.